In a world where competition is at its highest, where people with expensive suits and prestigious degrees dominate boardrooms, there's a story that will completely change the way we view talent, potential, and opportunities in life. It's the story of a nameless janitor named Daniel, someone no one expected would one day change not only his own fate, but the fate of a major corporation. Imagine yourself as a janitor, someone whose daily job is to clean, scrub, and ensure that the most luxurious spaces in the company remain spotless. You're never invited to sit at the table, and you never get the chance to take part in the high-stakes decisions that shape the company. You're invisible, just another cog in the wheel, a person whose work is always overlooked. But one day, you receive an invitation to attend an important business meeting at the company you've been serving for so long. What if, instead of being the one left out, you became the one who saved the company from collapse? Would you have the courage to seize this opportunity, or would fear and self-doubt hold you back, making you feel like you didn't belong? This story begins on a typical morning at Harrington Enterprises, a large corporation where crucial financial decisions are made, and where executives in designer suits prepare for a shareholder meeting. The boardroom is always filled with powerful figures, and of course, there's no room for a janitor. They couldn't imagine that a man in a janitor's uniform, holding a cleaning rag, would ever change everything in a single morning. So what brought Daniel to this meeting? And why would the most powerful woman at Harrington Enterprises, Ellena Harrington, invite him to attend this high-level meeting? This isn't a story about coincidence. It's a story about the ability to recognize and uncover hidden talents, about spotting opportunities that others overlook, and how a janitor could change an empire. When Ellena walked into the boardroom with Daniel by her side, none of the executives thought that this meeting would alter their lives. Daniel was a simple man, dressed in a janitor's uniform, someone who seemed to have no place in this world. The executives exchanged glances, their minds racing with skepticism and confusion. What is she doing bringing him here? Can he really understand the complex financial issues we're facing? But then, when Ellena spoke and explained why she had invited Daniel, the executives began to realize that they had completely underestimated him, and that Daniel was no ordinary man. His knowledge of finance, which had been dismissed for so long, would soon make them question their own understanding of business. As the room fell silent, Ellena made it clear that she saw something in Daniel that no one else did. In that moment, it became evident that Daniel wasn't there by accident. He was the one who had the answers to problems the boardroom had been struggling with for years. The room grew tense. The executives sat still, unsure of what would happen next. But Daniel, once just a janitor, was about to turn the tables. The questions began. Could someone like him truly have the insights that could change the future of Harrington Enterprises? Or would he fail under the pressure, revealing himself to be just another person who didn't belong? The silence in the boardroom was almost unbearable, like the calm before a storm. The executives, all sharp suits and cold eyes, exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to make of Daniel's sudden presence. Some of them were visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, trying to make sense of why this janitor was sitting at the table. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with uncertainty. Everyone was waiting for Ellena to explain. Daniel, on the other hand, was frozen. He had spent his entire life working in the shadows, invisible to the powerful men and women who made decisions from behind polished desks. He was used to being unnoticed, to being a mere cog in the machine, expected to scrub floors and empty trash bins. But today, he wasn't just cleaning the floor. He was in the heart of the business world, sitting at a table full of people who held the fate of the company in their hands. Ellena looked around the room, her eyes gleaming with a quiet confidence, as if she knew exactly what was about to unfold. She had already anticipated the shock, the disbelief, and the confusion. After all, No one expected a janitor to be part of such an important meeting. But Ellena wasn't interested in appearances. She wasn't interested in what people thought they knew. She was interested in results, and she had found something in Daniel that no one else had noticed. "I know what you're all thinking," Ellena began, her voice calm and unbothered by the tension that filled the room. "And I don't care." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and the room fell even quieter. For a moment, no one dared to speak. No one knew how to respond to her bluntness. Ellena wasn't asking for their approval. She was laying down the law. She turned to Daniel, who looked visibly uncomfortable, his shoulders tense as he gripped the cleaning rag in his hand. His heart raced, but there was a calmness in his eyes, a quiet understanding that he was no longer the janitor in the back room. This was his moment. "I invited him here today," Ellena continued, her gaze now fixed on the board members, "because I want him to weigh in on today's discussion." A murmur spread through the room. The CFO, Lawrence Whitman, who had been the most skeptical of all, cleared his throat and forced a polite smile, though it was clear he was struggling to understand the situation. "Mrs. Harrington, he began, but Ellena cut him off with a raised hand. "Let me finish," she said, her tone firm. "Daniel isn't here to make small talk. He's here because he has something to offer that none of you have recognized." The executives were still stunned. They had no idea what Ellena was talking about, but they were too polite to question her. They all turned their eyes back to Daniel, unsure of what to expect next. How could a janitor possibly contribute to a conversation about the company's future? What did he know about high-level business decisions? Ellena had been watching Daniel for some time now. Weeks earlier, she had overheard something that would change everything. The discovery it had all started innocently enough. Ellena had been passing by the staff break room on the 6th floor, a place she rarely visited. She had been heading to an important meeting when something unusual caught her ear. It wasn't the usual office chatter or complaints about work. It was a conversation about investment strategies. At first, she thought maybe one of her financial advisors had wandered into the wrong room. But as she listened more closely, she realized the voice was unfamiliar. The man speaking was confident, steady, and his knowledge was far beyond what one might expect from a janitor. "No, you don't want to touch that stock right now," the voice was saying. "It's got short-term gains, but if you look at the broader market trends, it's going to drop. The real money's in undervalued assets. Look at what happened in 2008. People thought they could ride the wave, but the smart ones knew where to invest after the dust settled." Ellena raised an eyebrow and stood still, listening for a few more minutes. The man was talking about market cycles, about how certain businesses were poised for growth, and about the risks most investors overlooked. He wasn't using the jargon that Wall Street professionals like to throw around to impress clients. His explanations were simple, grounded in reality, like someone who had been through the highs and lows of the market, someone who actually understood how money worked, not just the theoretical aspects. Ellena couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just any janitor. This man, Daniel, had a depth of knowledge that was almost unheard of. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had to find out how this man had learned all of this. So, she walked into the break room, and the moment Daniel saw her, he froze, clearly startled by her sudden presence. The revelation, "What are you doing in here?" Ellena asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. Daniel's face turned pale. It was clear he hadn't expected anyone to overhear his conversation. He stammered, trying to find the words to explain himself, but after a long pause, he finally spoke. "My dad owned a small business," Daniel said, his voice low. "He taught me everything he knew about finance. When he passed away, I had to drop out of college because I couldn't afford it. I've just been working these jobs since then, trying to make ends meet. Ellena looked at him for a long moment. She could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of the loss, but she also saw the raw potential in him. This wasn't a man who had just stumbled into knowledge. He had earned it the hard way. And that's when Ellena made her decision. She knew that Daniel was no ordinary man. He had something that could change everything, something no one in that room would expect. "I want you to come with me to a meeting next week," she said, her tone final. "Just sit in, listen, and if I ask you something, answer honestly." The decision Daniel had hesitated. He wasn't supposed to be in places like this, surrounded by people in suits and ties. He was a janitor. He cleaned the floors, not made the decisions. But Elena's eyes were unwavering. She wasn't asking for permission. She was giving him an opportunity. And so he agreed. The room grew even quieter as the seconds ticked by. Every eye was now trained on Daniel, the janitor who had somehow become the center of attention in a high-stakes meeting. The silence was thick, suffocating almost, as everyone waited for him to speak. What would he say? Would he stumble, trip over his words, and confirm their doubts? Or would he rise to the occasion and show them something they had all missed? Daniel sat up straighter in his seat, his palms sweating, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't his world. He had no business being here, surrounded by men and women in suits, discussing numbers and strategies. But as the moment stretched on, something inside him clicked. He wasn't just here because Ellena had invited him. He was here because he had earned the right to be here. And in that moment, Daniel realized that this wasn't just a meeting. It was his chance to prove everyone wrong. He wasn't just the janitor. He was someone who had learned the ins and outs of business, someone who had watched and listened and absorbed knowledge for years, waiting for the right opportunity to show the world what he was capable of. Ellena smiled slightly, sensing that Daniel was ready. She knew that he was about to do something remarkable. One of the executives, Martin Caldwell, leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, a smug look on his face. He was the kind of man who believed that only those with the right credentials and the right background could make meaningful contributions. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. "Well, Daniel," Martin said, a hint of mockery in his voice, "you've been invited to the table. Why don't you tell us what you think?" Daniel took a deep breath and looked at Martin, his gaze steady. He wasn't nervous anymore. He had been waiting for this moment his entire life. "I've looked over the reports," Daniel said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "And with all due respect, I don't think you're evaluating your assets correctly." There was a collective gasp in the room. How could a janitor know more about the company's assets than the CFO and all the analysts in the room? Lawrence Whitman, the CFO, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly caught off guard. He had expected Daniel to be a passive observer, someone who might have some opinions about basic cleaning products or maybe a suggestion for improving office morale. But financial strategy? That was a different matter entirely. "What do you mean?" Lawrence asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. Daniel's gaze sharpened as he leaned forward. "The problem isn't with the assets themselves," he said. "It's how you're assessing them. You're focusing too much on their current value, and you're missing their potential value." The room fell silent. Elena's eyes glinted with satisfaction. This was exactly what she had been waiting for. Daniel was speaking with authority, like a true expert. Daniel continued, his voice more confident now. "You're looking at your underperforming assets and thinking that they're liabilities. But the truth is, they have the potential for long-term growth. You need to look at the market trends and identify where the real value lies. It's not about what they're worth right now. It's about what they could be worth in the future." For a brief moment, no one spoke. The executives exchanged glances, their faces a mix of disbelief and curiosity. They had been expecting a janitor to fail, to crumble under the pressure. But Daniel was not backing down. He had clearly done his homework, and the more he spoke, the more they realized that he had seen something they hadn't. This wasn't just a fluke. This was real knowledge. Martin leaned forward, trying to regain control of the room. "Okay, Daniel," he said, still trying to sound condescending. "Let's say you're right. How exactly do you suggest we evaluate these assets differently?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "You need to start by looking at their future potential, not their present condition. Take the logistics division, for example." He turned to Lawrence, who was now visibly uncomfortable. "You're outsourcing a lot of your distribution, but your internal fleet is underutilized. You've got the infrastructure to handle it yourself, but you're paying premium rates for services you don't need." The CFO's face turned red. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly rattled. "That's not possible," he said, but Daniel cut him off. "Your models are outdated," Daniel said flatly. "You're using projections based on old fuel costs and pre-pandemic freight rates. They don't apply anymore. You're missing a huge opportunity to save money by restructuring your logistics." The room was still. Everyone was looking at Daniel, and for the first time they weren't seeing a janitor. They were seeing someone who had the ability to change the course of the company's future. Ellena sat back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. She had known all along that Daniel had the answers. She had been watching him, learning about his background, his knowledge, and his ability to think outside the box. She had taken a risk by bringing him into this room, but now it was paying off. "I think Daniel is right," said Alyssa Chun, a senior analyst, breaking the silence. "I just pulled up the numbers on my tablet, and he's correct. We're sitting on millions of dollars in underutilized assets. If we restructure the logistics division and cut out 30% of the outsourcing costs, we could save at least $8 million annually." The realization hit the room like a shockwave. Daniel wasn't just a janitor. He was the one who had solved a problem that had been plaguing the company for months, if not years. And now everyone in the room knew it. "Thank you, Daniel," Ellena said, her voice calm but filled with admiration. "That's exactly what we needed to hear." But the biggest shock was yet to come. As the murmurs of disbelief spread through the room, the executives were no longer trying to hide their surprise. This was not the janitor they had expected. This wasn't someone who would sit quietly in the corner and leave the important decisions to the real experts. This was someone who had just solved a major issue that no one else had been able to figure out. And now every one of them had to admit, but the shock didn't stop there. Daniel had delivered what they needed, and now the question was, what would happen next? Would this be just a one-off moment, or would his insights be recognized for while Ellena, sitting quietly at the head of the table, could sense the shift in the room? She could feel the executives' discomfort, the unease spreading as they realized they had all been caught in their assumptions. What would they do now? Would they dismiss Daniel, write him off as a fluke? Or would they face the truth? The very person they had ignored for years might just be the one with the answers they had been searching for? She broke the silence, her voice cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. "That's why Daniel is here," she said, her tone steady and commanding. "He's the one who saw what none of you saw. He's the one who solved a problem that you've all been blind to. And now we need to listen to him, not as a janitor, but as someone who has the skills, the knowledge, and the perspective that we need." The executives exchanged uneasy glances, their pride wounded, but they couldn't deny the truth of her words. For years, they had been making decisions based on old models, outdated assumptions, and theories that no longer applied. But Daniel? He had seen things clearly, cutting through the noise and the complexity to find a solution that could save the company millions. Elena's gaze turned to Lawrence, the CFO, who was still reeling from the revelation. "How long have we been looking for a financial consultant?" she asked, her voice tinged with challenge. 6 months, Lawrence replied, his voice strained. He was still trying to process everything that had just happened, still grasping the reality that a janitor had just outperformed him in his own area of expertise. Ellena nodded, her eyes never leaving Lawrence's. "Well, now we have one," she said simply. She turned to Daniel, a small smile on her lips. "Daniel, would you like to be that consultant? Effective immediately?" There was a brief moment of stunned silence. The executives were frozen, unsure of what to say. The idea of hiring a janitor, someone with no formal education, no professional background, was unfathomable. But what choice did they have? Daniel had just proven that he understood the company's financial issues better than anyone in the room. Martin Caldwell, ever the skeptic, let out a loud, incredulous laugh. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You're offering a janitor a consultant position? Just like that?" Ellena didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said calmly. "I'm offering him the job. And if you have a problem with that, you're free to leave." Lawrence, still struggling with the idea, pinched the bridge of his nose. "This isn't how we hire people, Ellena. We don't just hand out positions like this." Ellena raised an eyebrow, her expression hardening. "I own this company, Lawrence," she said, her voice unwavering. "And I can do whatever I want. You may not agree with my decision, but I'm offering Daniel the job because he's the one who solved our problem. Not you, not me, but him." The room fell into a stunned silence. Everyone was looking at Daniel now, unsure of what he would say. Could he really accept this offer? Was he ready to step into a role that no one in the room thought he deserved? Daniel's heart was racing. This was a moment he had never imagined. Just a few minutes ago, he had been a janitor, an invisible worker cleaning the floors and picking up trash. And now, Ellena was offering him a seat at the table, a chance to work alongside the very people who had ignored him for years. He had spent so much of his life being told he didn't belong in this world. He had spent years scraping by, watching others take the opportunities he was never given. But now all of that was changing. In that moment, Daniel realized something important. He didn't need permission to be great. He had been great all along. He just needed someone to notice. He looked at Ellena, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Yes," he said, the word carrying a weight that no one in the room could ignore. "I accept." The room erupted in whispers. Some executives exchanged glances, still stunned by the decision. Others tried to hide their disbelief, but they couldn't mask the shock that was written all over their faces. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. Daniel wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a financial consultant, and he had earned his place at the table. The shift in power, the meeting wrapped up shortly after, but Daniel could barely process what had just happened. He was still trying to come to terms with the fact that he had gone from cleaning floors to sitting at the head of a company's financial strategy. The executives filed out of the room, some whispering to each other, while others walked past Daniel without saying a word. But for the first time, Daniel didn't feel like he had to shrink away. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was part of something bigger. As the last of the executives left, Ellena remained seated, watching Daniel with an expression of quiet satisfaction. She had seen something in him long before anyone else did. She had watched him, studied him, and knew that he had the potential to do more than just mop floors. He had the mind of a strategist, the insight of a seasoned investor, and the courage to speak up when others would have stayed silent. She stood up and motioned for Daniel to follow her. "Walk with me," she said, leading him to the private elevator. Daniel hesitated for a moment, unsure of what was next, but he followed her, his mind racing. Once inside the elevator, Ellena pressed the button for the top floor. As the elevator rose, the silence between them felt different now. There was no more doubt, no more fear, just possibility. "You think this was luck?" Ellena asked, breaking the silence. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. "Wasn't it?" Ellena let out a quiet laugh and shook her head. "No, Daniel, it wasn't luck. It was opportunity, and you were ready for it." The beginning of a new chapter. The elevator doors opened, revealing Elena's private office on the top floor. It was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen before. A stunning space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. This was where the real decisions were made. This was where the future of the company was shaped. Ellena motioned for Daniel to follow her inside. "This company needs people who see things differently," she said, walking toward her desk. "People who aren't afraid to challenge the status quo. People who don't just sit in meetings nodding along to bad decisions because they're afraid to speak up." She turned to face him, her gaze intense. "That's why I hired you." Daniel was still trying to process everything. He had spent his entire life being told that he didn't belong in a world like this. But now, in this moment, he understood that it wasn't about where you started. It was about where you were willing to go. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, the weight of the responsibility sinking in. Elena's eyes softened. "You can," she said simply, "and you will." The power of opportunity. Daniel's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. He had gone from being a janitor to a financial consultant at one of the most powerful companies in the city. It was a journey that defied all expectations, a testament to the power of recognizing talent when no one else does. This story isn't just about Daniel's rise to the top. It's about the opportunities that exist for all of us, no matter where we start. Talent isn't determined by your job title or your background. It's determined by your willingness to learn, to grow, and to seize the opportunities that come your way. Daniel didn't need permission to be great. He simply needed someone to notice. If the story has inspired you, don't let it end here. Remember, talent isn't about your job title or where you start. It's about the courage to seize the opportunities that come your way, no matter where you are. So, if you've ever been told you don't belong or that you can't make a difference, let Daniel's story remind you that all it takes is the right moment and the right person to believe in you. Now it's your turn. What talents do you have that are waiting to be recognized? What opportunities have you been waiting to seize? Don't wait for permission to be great. Take that first step, believe in your potential, and make your own path. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of triumph, resilience, and the power of unseen talent. And leave a comment below telling us your story, because sometimes all it takes is one person to notice you, and your life could change forever. Remember, the world is full of untapped potential. Are you ready to show the world what you're capable of?